everyone, it's Charlie. This is going to be my Game of Thrones finale video for the top 10 WTF questions that they have to answer before the end of the series. Just long-running big question marks that hopefully they'll pay off or at least give us an idea that we can use as fans to extrapolate on. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the Game of Thrones videos. Obviously, it's the finale of the main show, but I'll be doing Game of Thrones prequel videos as we start to learn more about that. They're getting ready to start filming right now. There's been conflicting evidence about what's going on with that, so of course I'll do prequel videos next week after we get done talking about the finale. We'll do a new round of the HBO Now giveaway. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave a comment on the video. So careful for spoilers for everything that's happened on Game of Thrones so far. But starting with number 10, will they pay off Daenerys' visions from the Iron Throne and the House of the Undying, meaning that she never actually gets to sit on the Iron Throne? The thing that she's fought so hard for this whole time, reaching it, winning, quote-unquote, so to speak, but never actually getting to enjoy the fruits of her victory. Bittersweet fruits of victory. If you look at all the damage that she did to the Red Keep during Episode 5, she did not destroy the Iron Throne Room, she just destroyed the Lannister lion that had replaced the seven-pointed star that sat above the Iron Throne, which is a nice metaphor for her kicking Cersei to the curb, so to speak, or kicking her down to the basement where she was then crushed by the rest of the Red Keep as it caved in. Number 9, if Daenerys really does wind up dying, what will Drogon do? Because he's a weapon of mass destruction, and he would probably be pissed if Daenerys died. Would he just live out the rest of his life as a riderless dragon roaming around the world where he pleases? Dragons with proper access to a good food source would just continue to grow the older and older that they get. That was why Balerion the Black Dread grew so big. It's just because he lived to be so old and he continued to grow. He was close to about 200 years old at the time of death. And Drogon is less than 10 years old, so just imagine he could continue living for a couple hundred more years. There is precedence for riderless dragons in A Song of Ice and Fire after the Doom of Valyria, because you have to imagine that during that era, the Rise of the Freehold, there were dragons everywhere all over the place. But after the Doom, most of the dragons that survived were Targaryen dragons. There was a time during the Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryen Civil War that happened a long time before the actual Blackfire Rebellion, where there were 6 riderless dragons living on Dragonstone. So after Aegon's conquest, it wasn't unusual for there to be a lot of riderless dragons just chilling around. Number 8, follow-up question to that Daenerys question, of course. Jon Snow has told us several times last season and this season, as recently as Season 8, Episode 5, that he absolutely does not want to be king. So if he's forced into a situation where Daenerys isn't around anymore and he's the last remaining true Targaryen heir to the Iron Throne, what do the Lords of the Realm do if he refuses them again? There have actually been moments in Westerosi history where matters of succession become a really big problem, and what has happened is they call a great council where all the lords of the different realms come together to decide who's going to be the next king. It's the closest thing that Westeros has ever had to a parliament, but they would only come together briefly, and it's only happened 3 times in the last 300 years since Aegon's conquest, although there have been many more failed attempts to call a great council. The most recent one was when Catelyn Stark tried to convince Renly that he, Stannis, and Robb Stark should all hold a great council to deal with the issue of Joffrey Baratheon after they discovered that he was the bastard son of Jaime Lannister, not Robert Baratheon. The very first Great Council was called after an event very similar to what's playing out on the TV show right now in Season 8 with a succession issue. You have Jon Snow and Daenerys that both have a claim to the Iron Throne, but technically the male heir has a stronger claim. The reason why Jon Snow has the stronger claim to the Iron Throne is because Westeros history has typically practiced male-favoring primogeniture, where the male heir of the oldest living male heir inherits everything before any of the king's other children. So even though Daenerys is the only living child of the Mad King, technically the line of succession skips her and goes straight to Jon Snow, the Mad King's grandson, because Jon Snow is the oldest living legitimate male heir of Rhaegar Targaryen, who was the oldest living legitimate male heir of the Mad King. In real life, a really good example of that is Prince William. He's ahead of the line of succession of his uncles, Prince Andrew and Prince Philip, because he's the oldest living male heir of Prince Charles, who's the oldest living male heir of Queen Elizabeth. During this very first Great Council, the reason why it was called is because Jaehaerys I and Queen Alysanne had a succession issue where Jaehaerys I skipped over his oldest living granddaughter, who was technically the closest relation by blood, for a male cousin because he felt like the realm would support a stronger claim from the male, even though his granddaughter was technically the closest relation to him by blood. So it's not unusual for Westeros to call a Great Council to decide matters of state. But number 7, if Arya told Gendry that she doesn't want to be a lady of a castle, what does she do after this? Does she continue acting like a rogue assassin, dishing out justice, or taking contracts on the DL? She's way too famous to continue living in Westeros. Too many people know her face, even though she can wear other people's faces. There was a scene during Season 6, Episode 8 that I hope that they pay off because it seemed like a pretty big setup for a way to send her character off at the end of the series. She's talking to Lady Crane, talking about escaping from the Faceless People, leaving this life, and she says, "Where will you go?" Arya eventually says, "What's west of Westeros?" Says, "I'd like to see that someday."
Where will you go?
Essos is east, and Westeros is west. But what's west of Westeros?
I don't know.
Nobody does. It's where all the maps stop.
The edge of the world, maybe.
I'd like to see that.
So do they pay that off by having one of her final shots on the series be of her sailing beyond the Sunset Sea to the Western continent? Otherwise, her only other option would be to go back to Essos. But just remember during the end of Season 4, beginning of Season 5, where you see Arya boarding a ship to go away. Will they do something similar like that for her at the end of the Game of Thrones series? Will that be one of the final shots of her just sailing off into the unknown? 6, Tyrion took a weird interest in Bran Stark after the battle with the White Walkers and had this whole big scene talking to him about being the only living male heir to Ned Stark. "You would make a great Lord of Winterfell." Even though Bran said, "I don't really want anything anymore." Later in that very same episode, when Varys was talking to Tyrion about possibly getting rid of Daenerys, he said maybe the best choice for a king would be one that doesn't want power. So if Jon Snow were to refuse the throne, who would become the next king if the lords even want another king? Gendry is another newly minted heir with a now legitimate claim to the Iron Throne through Robert Baratheon. But as history repeats itself during A Song of Ice and Fire several times, I think people would be worried that Gendry would just be another weak king like Robert Baratheon. There are a lot of people that are wondering if they would make Bran Stark the new king. How would that even work? Because as Bran said, he doesn't want anything, literally anything beyond probably 3 regular meals and handicap access to a nearby weirwood tree. For the most part, he's basically a glorified library of world history with perfect recall, so he's more useful in situations where you need lots of detailed information about things, so you'd need a situation where Bran would have someone around him to help focus his attention. And even if they just want to make him a figurehead, he'd really be better off living with the Archmaesters in the Citadel with a team of them around him just writing down every bit of history they can get out of him. Because if it's the Maester's job to record history and Bran is literal history, he can tell them everything that's ever happened in the greatest detail, then why wouldn't you take advantage of that and have the Maesters start recording everything? 5, a lot of us been wondering, will there actually be an Iron Throne anymore, or will they, as we've all suspected, just destroy it for symbolic reasons? You can't win the Iron Throne if there's no Iron Throne anymore. When HBO started promoting Game of Thrones Season 8, they used the For the Throne hashtag. We were all like, that doesn't make any sense, because we were still thinking that the White Walkers were going to be the biggest threat. Like, the Iron Throne isn't even going to matter anymore by the end of the series, because we're dealing with the army of the dead. It's life or death here. Who cares about a pointy throne made of a bunch of swords? Number 4, a lot of people asking, will Bronn ever get his bigger castle? And who's going to be the new Warden of Highgarden and the Reach? Who's going to be the new Warden of the West, ruling from Casterly Rock? It seems like Tyrion's days are numbered, so if Tyrion isn't around anymore, then all the Lannisters are gone. Who is going to take Casterly Rock? We can already probably guess that Sansa's going to continue to be Wardeness of the North, Sweet Robin would continue to rule from the Vale, Yara Greyjoy will be the Lady of the Iron Islands, and whoever winds up being picked to succeed Jon Snow, if Jon Snow abdicates the Iron Throne, then that person would be Lord of the Crown Lands, if not king in name only, if they decide to adopt a policy more like modern-day British government where the Crown wields no actual political power and is therefore more symbolic and cultural value. A lot of people wondering if they're going to adopt the democratic theory of Westeros. Like, is that going to be the future of the kingdom going forward? 3, really important one that we haven't talked about a whole lot. Will the show's ending provide a clear thesis for what A Song of Ice and Fire is really about? There's going to be a lot of arguments for what Game of Thrones has really been about this whole time. It's not about climate change, I'll tell you that. People try to liken it to allegory, but recent events seem to suggest it's more of a story about the dangers of autocracy and putting so much power in the hands of a single person, the value of shared rule, people working towards the common good, all the while subverting a lot of the tropes of typical fantasy stories about good and evil. There is no true good, there is no true evil, only bitter victories, and the reality that you're faced with going forward. forward. Like, Martin talks a lot about the time that happened after Aragorn's victory, after he ascended the throne. How did they deal with all the orcs? Did he go around killing all the orc babies after that? So no one really gets to ride off into the sunset with a classic happily ever after. Just very general, broad themes that everybody in 50, 100, 150 years could read and apply to their own lives. Not any kind of direct allegory for what's happening in present day for us. George R. R. Martin has said that his ending was inspired a lot by Tolkien's ending of Lord of the Rings, and Tolkien absolutely hated the idea of allegory and the suggestion that his books were about World War I and World War II. He was very adamant that he wasn't reference anything in present day when he was writing, so that people in hundreds of years could read Lord of the Rings and apply general themes of what's happening to whatever's happening to them in that future timeline. Number 2, other big question, will Jon Snow ever give Ghost the good boy hugs and pats on the head that he deserves? Like, we just kind of rode off into the sunset with Tormund. A lot of people are expecting that we'll see Ghost again before the end of the series. Then probably one of the biggest questions, number 1, will the ending give us a good sense as to whether or not history will eventually repeat itself again, as in, will there ever be any more White Walkers, the threat of another long night in 1,000 years? Will Bran also be able to pass his abilities on to another three-eyed raven when he gets ready to die of old age, just like the Blood Raven passed his abilities to Bran before he died? Remember when Bran said that he was the literal living memory of all of mankind's history? Obviously, that has to continue living, so he would have to pass his knowledge on to another three-eyed raven. But what'll happen is my finale video will post Sunday night just like normal, and then I'll do a bunch of bonus videos after just reflecting on the series. If there's any specific videos you want me to do, let me know in the comments. Don't forget about the bonus episode that's airing the week after the finale. I'll do a video for that just like I would for any of the other episode videos. Then obviously I'll start doing some Game of Thrones prequel videos, but I don't think that that's supposed to premiere till next spring at the earliest, maybe next summer, depending on how quickly they get through their episode production schedule this summer. But don't forget, we have Watchmen coming this fall to HBO. We have The Witcher Netflix series. We have the Lord of the Rings series, which is probably going to start sometime towards the end of next year. There's a bunch of other big stuff that's starting later this year, but as long as you have alerts enabled for my channel, you'll see the videos when I post them, so you'll see that stuff, no worries. I'll leave the giveaway open till I start posting bonus videos on Monday, so I'll just remind people when I post my finale video tomorrow. Click here for my Game of Thrones Season 8